The following Stealing the Mind Bible Conference presentation is by Sodera and is entitled One Small Speck to Man. For a free catalog of all of our tapes and books, call Compass at 1-800-977-2177 or on the web at compass.org.
Well, good evening, everybody, and it's a privilege for me to be here. Just tell you a little bit about myself. That's a bit of my back garden. It's a 15-foot python. It's dead in a tree, and a dead crocodile there as well. I'll talk about that later. If I have a nervous patient come to see me, I put on my best reassuring face and sit down beside them, hold their hand, and say, well, you know, my father was a tailor, and so I learnt to sew when I was very young, so I've got the hang of that. And if I have a very nervous patient, I say to them, look at that, steady as a rock. Only trouble is I operate with this hand. If you're going to study animals, you need to get hold of them, so that's what those things are doing in my garden. And in the jars at the bottom, there's bits of snake, bits of lizard, bits of all sorts of things which I won't mention. A few things buried in the garden as well. I don't know what's going to happen when I move house. There's my niece Rebecca visiting us. It's actually in daylight, but it's not so clear here. She's taken a holiday snap of my python in the garden. And there's Melanie. I've got two daughters, Melanie and Lisa. Melanie's the oldest one, and she's also the sensible one. So we're going to talk this evening about ape-like and human-like fossils. Before we go on to that, I'm going to introduce a few of what I call principles. The Chalicotherium principle, and that will show that any similarity between two creatures does not mean any evolutionary relationship. The coelacanth principle, that all creatures could have lived contemporaneously in the past, that is, living side by side. And the stupid things principle. Actually, it's pronounced stupid things principle. Now, we all know there's good evidence that life has not been around for millions of years, but for this lecture, I'm going to use the commonly accepted dates purely as a starting framework for the discussion, okay? But I don't for 1 minute believe in the millions of years. First off, the Chalicotherium principle. There's a head of a Chalicotherium. When they first found it in 1930, 40 or something, they thought, well, that looks very much like a horse. That must be related to a horse. There's a horse skull. And they do look fairly similar. But when they found bits of the rest of the body, they found the Chalicotherium's front feet looked like that with claws. And when they found the rest of the critter, it was basically halfway between a bear and a gorilla and a horse. There's no relationship to it whatsoever. Bear in mind the Chalicotherium principle when we talk about ancient apes, when people say, well, that ape has got some sort of intermediary feature between apes and humans, so it must be on its way to becoming a human. The fact that some ancient ape might have some similarity to some human features doesn't mean anything at all, okay? So, Chalicotherium principle, if any extinct creature has any similarity to any living creature, this does not necessarily mean that true creatures are related in any way whatsoever. Now, the coelacanth principle, that's a picture of a tuatara, which is a 2-foot lizard found in New Zealand. It's alive today in New Zealand, but its youngest fossil is 135 million years old. So that means that apparently this thing has been living on the Earth for 135 million years without leaving any fossil record of its existence. There's the coelacanth itself. That's a fossil coelacanth. Coelacanth's youngest fossil is 65 million years old. And there's a living one that you can dig up or fish out in the Indian Ocean. And so youngest fossil, 65 million years old. It's alive today in the Indian Ocean. So look at that from a graphical point of view. There's a timeline And the coelacanth has been around supposedly for the last 65 million years and not left any fossil record of its existence. But there are fossils that supposedly date from 65 back to 300 million years. And the tuatara has been living around in New Zealand for the last 135 million years and not dying conveniently in a way to leave a fossil record. So we can say from that, if a creature is not found in any particular sedimentary rock layer, this does not mean that that creature was not alive at the time that that layer was deposited. Okay? Give you time to absorb that. Coelacanth principle. In other words, in the absence of any direct evidence to the contrary, any creature could have lived at any time before or after its earliest or latest fossil, which, in other words, means that all creatures could have lived contemporaneously. That means that T-Rex could have lived with human beings. Okay? The exception being day 5 in Genesis, when there were just sea creatures and birds, and not even the Chalicotherium was around at that time. Now, the stupid things principle. This is taken from, it's your country, the Unscientific American, March 1940, page 159. This is an article, a short article, telling you what the spectacles of the future will look like. There it is to clarify it. Single spectacle. This is in your journal. Some biologists looking thousands of years into the future suggest that in time all our seeing will be done with one eye, and eventually we'll have an eye in the middle of the forehead. We'll all become cyclops. So the stupid things principle stands for some scientists tell us people incredibly dumb things. So in summary, Chalicotherium principle, any similarity between two creatures does not necessarily mean any relationship. The coelacanth principle, all creatures could have lived contemporaneously in the past. And the stupid things principle, that some scientists can be stupid. Okay, just as a way of reminding everybody, that's how things are supposed to have been. Chimpanzees, in the bottom right-hand corner, are supposed to have evolved from shrews that lived 65 million years ago. And they, in turn, arose from some fish that lived a long time ago. And a long time before that, 3.5 billion, 4 billion, who cares how many billion years, some blob, one small speck, was our ancestor. Now, about 4 to 6 million years ago, some ancient ape-like critters became what's called Australopithecines, and you try saying that with a dry mouth. Australopithecines, and they in turn turned into human beings. That's Melanie again when she's a bit younger. And so that's how people say that apes and humans are distant cousins. It gets a bit complicated because animals and plants have also had a common ancestor, apparently. Well, that's the story anyway. So the standard evolutionary scheme, in another way of looking at it, ancient apes supposedly evolved into Australopithecines and some other characters called Homo habilis. By the way, they swap and change the names as they fancy, so these names might be out of date, but it doesn't matter. And those things eventually turn into Homo erectus and Neanderthals, which are both supposed to be subhuman, and then eventually modern humans appeared on the scene. So let's talk about Australopithecines first. And the longer we go on about Australopithecines, the less able I will be to pronounce the word. They lived between, who knows, 1.5 to 4 million years ago. But they were supposed to evolve from chimpanzees, you see. But last time I looked, there's no fossils of any chimpanzees or gorillas. So there's the Australopithecines, and there's the chimpanzees and gorillas on the right-hand side with no fossils at all. There is Lucy, which is probably the most famous Australopithecine, And that's the way the bones are presented in most museums. That's from the Natural History Museum in London. Lucy's height in that format was about 3.5 feet, and supposedly lived about 3 to 3.6 million years ago. And of course, this exhibit gives the deceptive impression that this creature was an upright walking pre-human, and gives the casual observer the idea, well, it's obvious that a few more million years that would have been you and me. But there's the head of another Australopithecine, OH5, on the left-hand side. You can see, well, he doesn't look like my ancestors. I don't know what they're like in North America. That's Lucy. Now, if you look at it, the Lucy specimen compared to, there's a gorilla, orangutan, and chimpanzee, and Lucy is the second from the right. You can see that in terms of skull shape, skull size, the way the ribs fit together, the arm bones, finger bones, leg bones, they've got long arms, they've all got short legs relatively. The Australopithecine falls into the ape-like format. Slight problem apparently with the pelvis there in Lucy. The pelvis distinctly different from the other apes, the living apes, and looks a bit more like a human ape. That's a bit contentious because I haven't been able to examine the fossil myself, but some say that the way those bones have been put together is, in a sense, a fraud or not entirely accurate. There's the finger bones on the left-hand side of Lucy, and you can see they're curved, and particularly we're looking at the top end of the finger. All the bones in humans and in human hands and feet are curved underneath, but on the top portion you can see they're curved. And the foot bones also are curved in Australopithecines, and there you can compare them to the corresponding bones in the chimpanzee. They're curved. So that suggests this animal climbed trees. And there's, in contrast, there's a human bone. There's an X-ray of a human finger, and the top end of the bone you can see is relatively straight. Incidentally, there's a fracture that's healing on that bone there. There's a human foot, and this is going to be a challenge. There, you could see, if the lights were turned off completely, that the bones are straight in the human foot, and there's a fracture as well. That's a common fracture that happens in humans when you turn over and sprain your ankle. You either sprain your ankle or you pull off a little bone on the metatarsal there. It's bleached now. Go back a bit. Thanks. Now, Lucy itself does not have a foot, but an Australopithecine foot was identified from South Africa in 1995, and the dark parts are the actual fossil bones themselves, and I've drawn in the rest of the foot as to how it would have looked like. That drawing of mine is a copy of the drawing from the paper that identified the bones, and I'm not quite sure whether that thumb on the foot would have stuck out more or whether it was as it is there. It may have stuck out more. In comparison, there's a chimpanzee hand and foot, and you can see that the chimpanzee has basically got 4 hands. It hasn't got a foot, really. It's got a hand on its foot with a thumb. So that's the comparison. If you look at the human, that's a human left foot from the front, and you can see the big toe on the left-hand side. And if you look at that where the arrow's pointing, that gap between the index metatarsal and the great toe metatarsal, if you open it up, you'd find in the human there's this flat area of bone which is characteristic of the human form, and that shows that the big toe is stuck to the rest of the foot, stuck to the index toe. Okay, so that facet is very important. And there's a chimpanzee left foot with the same view, and you see there's no facet there. And in the Australopithecine foot, there's no facet either. So that confirms that the Australopithecine did not have human-like feet. Curiously, it was 1995 that specimen was identified, and in England there's this Walking with Caveman TV series, which is a documentary about human origins, and they showed what's supposed to be an Australopithecine there. And if you look closely at its right foot, you can see it's got a big toe like a human toe. It's not surprising because it's a human being in a bear suit, basically. But that's supposed to be an Australopithecine. But that was made, I don't know, 3 years ago or something. 8 years before that program was made, they knew that the Australopithecines had thumbs on their feet. So that's not entirely accurate, is it? So do Australopithecines represent a transitional form between chimpanzees and humans? Well, in terms of brain size, they were much the same size as chimpanzees. And in body size, that Lucy character was actually smaller than a chimpanzee, so that's not really an intermediary feature. If you look at the way the chest is made up, in the chimpanzee, the chest bones are arranged so that the chest is a pyramidal thing, and so they tend to have a bit of a pot belly, same in gorillas as well. If you get hold of those Australopithecine bones and arrange them anatomically, you'll find that they also have got the ape-like pyramidal structure in contrast to the human, which is more of a barrel-shaped chest outline. So the Australopithecine is distinctly an ape-like chest. If you look at the way the teeth erupt in the Australopithecine, the I stands for incisor, the C for canine, and the M for molar. And the first incisor in the chimpanzee and the Australopithecine erupt 2 years after the second molar, and the canines after the second molar. In humans, it's entirely different. The canines erupt before the second molar, and the index and and the second molar erupt together. So there isn't an evolutionary trend there either. If you look at the size of the teeth in the lower jaw, we've got the chimpanzee jaw on the top, the Australopithecine in the middle, and the human at the bottom. Chimpanzees got large incisors, they're the front teeth, medium-sized molars. Australopithecines characteristic of very small incisors and very large molars, in contrast to the human. So there isn't an evolutionary trend there either. And in fact, when you think of it, chimpanzees, when they have their tea party, drink tea and eat biscuits the way the humans do. So they don't need to change their teeth to become human anyway if they wanted to. So there's no evolutionary necessity for any ape to change its jaw or teeth structure just to become human. If you look at the air sinuses, they're the air pockets inside the bones in your skull. The hard palate is the bone of the roof of the mouth, and the zygoma is the outside bone in your cheek. Both Australopithecines and chimpanzees have air sinuses in those places, and humans don't have, so there's no evolutionary trend there. So in a brief summary, Australopithecines have got long arms, long curved fingers, short legs, long curved toes, thumb on the foot, so they must have climbed trees to some extent. They had a flat foot with a thumb, so they couldn't walk like a man. So in conclusion, we'd say that Australopithecines represent extinct apes that differed from living apes but have no bearing on human origins. Now at this point, I might just say that if you did by chance find fossil evidence of an ape that walked entirely upright, obviously used stone tools, was very intelligent, that in itself would not mean that apes evolved into humans. It would just mean to say that certain apes in the past were different from living apes, okay? That's if you found such a thing. Okay, Homo habilis is the next character to look at. And there on the timeline seemed to hang out about 2 million years ago, supposedly. And there is, to my knowledge, the most complete Homo habilis specimen on the planet. And from that, you can tell that was your great-great-grandfather. Specimen's called OH62. It also, so when they found the bones, the long bones, the arms and the leg bones there of Homo habilis, they were really surprised because it's only 3 foot 6 inches tall. They expected to find, they had skulls of Homo habilis before. When they found the limb bones, they were really surprised because it's so small. They expected to find another halfway house between living apes and humans, which isn't the case. So OH62 is only a 3 foot 6 critter like Lucy. There's another Homo habilis specimen. There's a number of specimens. I've just picked out a few just to give you examples. This one had a brain the size of a chimpanzee. There's no other body skeletal bones found at all, so it's just that skull. And then there's another Homo habilis specimen, 1470, probably the most famous one. It's now been called Homo ergaster. This terminology is always deceptive because Homo gives the unwary observer the idea that it's something related to human beings, Homo, and so it's been specified with that name, but we don't really know whether it's got anything to do with humans at all. Probably not. We'll come to that. This thing was also alive 1.9 million years ago. Now, it's considered by some to be a human ancestor because it had a large brain, something between 750 and 800 mils. I don't know what that is in cubic inches, because for you Americans, do you cubic inches? That's 800 mils I'll stick with. Okay. Now, its brain size is, say, equivalent or slightly bigger than the largest gorilla brain. That doesn't mean to say that it was more intelligent by 50 mils. And it's 130 mils, say, smaller than the smallest human brain. That doesn't mean to say it's 150 mils or 130 mils dimmer than a human being. Now, we know that men have larger brains than women. And women are always right. So you can't tell intelligence simply by the size of the brain. There's a brain scan of a man of about 40 who was knocked unconscious by some accident. And they did a brain scan, and that was what they saw. And the top of the front of the head is at the top, and the back of the head is at the bottom. And the black area is basically just fluid inside his skull, and the gooey, pinky, it's grey stuff there, is his brain, which is pushed to the back of the skull. Now, that was not related to the accident. That's the way he was either born with or he's developed over the years. And when he recovered from his accident, his consciousness is perfectly normal again. So what that shows you is that here's a man who's got a brain capacity which is, by that reckoning, less than the average gorilla, but he's a perfectly normal human being. So it tells you that the human brain is special because God made it special, and it's not a chimpanzee brain that's been enlarged just a little bit. Going back to the 1470 skull, it's a little bit problematic because the fossil was found in hundreds of pieces, and when they put it together, the only way that you could join the face to the skull was at the top of the nose, just there. And because it was just a fragile piece of connection, you could actually alter the angle of the face in any way you chose, and if you wanted to make it more vertical, you get a human-like face, and that's how they first presented the fossil. They thought, hey, this is a great find. It's obviously subhuman, on its way to being human, and if you pull the face out forwards, you get more of an ape-like face. So there's no way of determining from this fossil which of those is correct anyway. But if you look at the fossil, comparing it to other Australopithecine fossils, you see that the depth of the cheek is very much ape-like, and if you look at the distance between the bottom of the nose and the top of the teeth line, it's very deep. It's like an ape again. Compare that to the human. By the way, the human is on the left-hand side. The human's got a very narrow cheekbone, and the distance between the nose and the teeth is small as well. If you look at the fossil from the side, there's the human fossil, human skull in the middle, and the Homo erectus 15,000 skull on the right, which we'll come to later on. And you can see that when you put the skull on the table, there's a big gap between the bottom of the skull and the top of the tooth line. So it's a totally unhuman-like shape. So, just a brief overview of Homo habilis. You've got this little tiny 0862. You got the chimp-sized 1413 skull, and you got this larger 1470 skull. So I'd reckon that 1470 was really a large ape. And in concluding of Homo habilis, the term simply represents other extinct apes, nothing to do with human origins again. Yeah, it's very good, but it's got nothing to do with this talk whatsoever. If you want to talk about whale evolution, then that's one of the ancestors to whales, apparently. So if we go on to Homo erectus. Homo erectus, you're wearing me out with your giggles. Found up to 2 million years old, these fossils are. So you can see they're starting to become contemporaneous with the other fossils we looked at. And there's a number of different Homo erectus type fossils. They've got big brows on the front, they've got sort of sloping foreheads and angulation at the back of the skull as well. Modern human brain size goes from almost 900 mils to twice that. And you can see the Java man, Hexion, Solo there, different Homo erectus skulls. They fall within the modern human range. We know that they used stone tools, they had control of fire, and there's evidence to suggest that they migrated across open seas in Indonesia, so they're pretty intelligent individuals. They're also supposed to have died out 500,000 years ago, but even the evolutionists will acknowledge that a specimen from Cow Swamp in Western Australia is only 10,000 years old. That's a wonderful name, Cow Swamp. I'll say that again, Cow Swamp, it's great. And Cossack skull, which is also from Western Australia, actually it can't be properly dated except within that range. So it could actually be younger than Isaac Newton's skull, but it's acknowledged as having Homo erectus features. So 300 years to 6,000 years. The most complete Homo erectus skeleton is this 15,000 specimen from Kenya, also called the Turkana boy, found from the coastline of the Lake Turkana in Kenya. There it is in the museum in Nairobi, dark in the corner there. This character was about 12 years old. We know that he was not fully grown because his bones haven't fully matured, so we know he's only going to be about 12 years old. He's 5 foot 6 inches tall at that age, so when he'd grown to maturity, he would have been over 6 foot tall. He's got the body shape of local Maasai warrior type of shape. His brain size was 800 to 900 mils, and he lived 1.6 million years ago, apparently. We'll come back to him later. So does having a large brow mean that an individual is subhuman? There's Solo Man from Indonesia. And there's an X-ray of a patient of mine. The radiographer called me to... You can't really see that very well. It's a shame. It's got a big brow there. You can't. It's a little line. I'll tell you what. Oh, you can see it there. Oh, is it? Is it? Well, I can see it anyway. If I point to it, look, it's there. Okay? Anyway, radiographer asked me to see this patient, showed me the X-ray, and I got really excited. I thought some Homo erectus had just walked into the casualty department. And when I went into the casualty department, there was this guy standing there. I said, "Can I take a picture of your skull, your head?" And he was very obliging, and that's it. And so you can see when you have somebody with a really big brow on an X-ray or a skull bone, and you put living tissue over it, how the individual looked like in life is going to be very different. So when you do see fossils with big brows, you can't just automatically think, "Hey, that's a bit of a thick-looking, dim-looking individual." I didn't say that to him. Just for interest, there's a gorilla skull, and there's the big brow. There's that black hole in the middle is the frontal sinus. That's the bit that when you have a head cold, you get all bunged up in there and gives you the headache and all that goo that comes out. Anyway, well, there's That's the front of the brain case, and you can see that the front of the brain case has got nothing to do with the shape of the brow itself. So if you change the shape of the brow, the brain is going to be unaffected. So is a sloping forehead a subhuman feature, as some people would make out? There is a chap called Alan Walker, who's a paleontologist, and he's talking on another TV program called Ape Man on BBC Two in 7th of March 2000. And he's trying to tell you that regarding this 15,000 skull, let's see if this works. Sound?
Is that one can see between a Homo erectus skull and a modern human skull, I mean, you can look at mine as an example, is that he has hardly any frontal lobes here, so he has next to no forehead. From above his eyes, it just goes straight back, whereas in modern humans, we all have this lump of frontal lobe of the brain sticking up here, giving us this more vertical forehead.
So that's a pretty dogmatic statement. Is he right? But remember the stupid things principle. A sloping forehead is a normal human characteristic. This does not mean that an individual has no frontal lobes. There's 2 X-rays of people walking around in the south coast of England at the moment. They look perfectly human and they behave perfectly human. And there's the shape of the brain case. You can see a sloping brain on one side and the high vertical forehead on the other. So the slopiness of the forehead doesn't give you any indication of subhumanness. And anyway, there's an example of a skull from Peru. They used to bind the heads of the little babies, and they like their babies looking like that when they grow up. And so there's a guy with a really big forehead, and would you say he's more human than any of us? I'm not sure. So just to show you that the brain is just molded by whatever the shape of the skull is. So if you bend the skull around, the baby will grow up into an infant with a warped brain, but that doesn't make any difference to the function of the brain. And having small frontal lobes has no bearing on humanness. You can be fully human without having frontal lobes. We'll come to that in just a second. There's a real human brain from the left-hand side, and the green area is the frontal lobe. If you have a road accident or some sort of nasty accident like that, and you have a crush injury to the front, and your brain is mashed up, you can actually remove quite a substantial proportion of the frontal lobes, and without affecting the individual's humanness or their intellectual capability or whatever. If you remove both frontal lobes, you tend to be a little bit upset. But you can remove a substantial amount. But I would always ask you to ask their permission first. And there's that fella from before who has no frontal lobes at all. So this idea that Homo erectus with its sloping forehead was subhuman has no scientific basis. The skull vault itself, that's the top end of the skull of a fossil individual. And there's a living human. And you can see that the shape occurs in living humans. Now, there's a lump of flint in my hand there. Well, it's not in my hand, it's a photograph of a lump of flint in my hand. And it's not actually a photograph, is it, if it's a digital image? It's a photo. It's a digital presentation of what ordinarily would have been a photograph of flint in my ooh. Now, you know that you can train chimpanzees to bang 2 stones together repeatedly if you show them how to do it, and eventually a flake will break off, and you can teach chimpanzees and gorillas to use a broken flake to cut things with. You can go that far and teach them. That's a big difference from an individual making a stone axe tool. Okay, it's a big difference. Now, Homo erectus is supposed to have made the same type of stone chopper for 1 million years. When you try and make, has anyone ever tried to make a stone tool here? Anyone? Yeah? Was it easy? No. It's incredibly difficult. I'd say that I haven't managed to do one myself yet. I'm digging myself a hole here. But it's very difficult. Anyway, I'll tell you it's very difficult. And if you manage to do it, you'll be a human being. Actually, okay. Now, Homo erectus is supposed to have made the same stone tools for 1 million years. Now, you think of it, if you could make us anything, wouldn't you try and change it a little bit the next week? I think I'll just improve on that. 1 million years. And yet, modern humans have gone from the Stone Age to the Space Age in 10,000 years, apparently. Now, obviously, it's implausible that any creature with the intelligence to make a stone chopper would continue to do the same thing for 1 million years. It doesn't make sense, does it? So if Homo erectus was clever enough to make a stone chopper, he would have landed on the moon 1 million years ago. But there's no evidence for fossils on the moon, so the dating of Homo erectus must be wrong. And the dating for all those other things must be wrong as well. So we conclude with Homo erectus that all the features of Homo erectus skull and skeleton are found in living humans. By the way, I didn't make it clear that from the skull downwards, everybody is happy that it's a totally human skeleton. What people have said is that it's a totally human skeleton with a subhuman skull stuck on the top of it. But I'm arguing that all the features of the Homo erectus skull are found in living humans, including the skull. And the intellectual capability of Homo erectus was no different from living humans. Therefore, Homo erectus was a normal human variation. Neanderthals. Yeah, we can dull it down a bit again now. Thanks. Neanderthals, there they are. Curious, they seem to appear in the middle of nowhere in history and then disappear for no good reason as well, so somewhere between 200,000 and 35,000 years ago. Characteristics that had a large brain size, mostly larger than living human brain size. They were stocky, average height 5'6". They used fire, sophisticated stone tools, actually made musical instruments with a modern Western scale. They found a bare flute with all the holes in the right place. It's supposed to be dated 35,000 years old or something. And they buried their dead with flowers on their graves. I don't think it's very funny when the person died and they were, yeah, it's not funny. How would you like it? You just buried somebody and laid flowers on them and everybody else started laughing. Anyway, now they had large skulls and they had this thing called a bun on the back of the head, which was a protrusion, so the back of the skull stuck out a little bit. They had thick bones, bowed leg, healed fractures all over the place, and tooth decay. Apart from that, they were fine. So the question is, since they appeared in some little window in history, supposedly, could their features have been the result of disease and inbreeding, or both, rather than being some evolutionary sort of blind alley? There's what we call the bun in two of the specimens, the La Chapelle and La Ferracie Neanderthal skulls. And there's some tracings of normal human skulls taken from a radiological textbook, and you can see the bottom one has got a bit of a bun. And there's an X-ray of a living human with a bit of a bun on the back. So certainly that type of skeletal feature is part of the normal human features that you find these days. Are Neanderthal features due to some sort of disease? And there's a guy called Ivanhoe back in 1970 who studied all the Neanderthal bones and found that every Neanderthal skull studied so far shows signs compatible with severe rickets. Rickets is a disease of vitamin D deficiency. And here's the technical bit. You need the cartilage is the floppy bit in your ear and your nose. And to make that into bone, you have to put calcium onto that. And to do that, you need vitamin D to do the work. So vitamin D is important for your bone production. Vitamin D is found in fish, eggs, and milk. But a very important factor of its manufacture is in the skin. So the ultraviolet light from sunlight activates molecules in the skin to make vitamin D. That's important. So a combination of a lack of sunlight, a poor diet, and dark skin, because dark skin blocks off the ultraviolet light, a combination of those will tend to give you rickets. And so you can imagine that if a population of dark-skinned people migrated out of the Middle East northwards, they'll tend to get rickets. If the climate was suddenly catastrophically changed, you might think that would have happened after the flood with all sorts of climate changes there. And in fact, if you look at the typical Neanderthal features, you'll find that there's an increase northwards away from the equator, so that fits in with that as well. And so if you look at features that rickets causes, they cause enlarged, elongated, flattened skulls, and there's a Neanderthal skull to go with that. That fits in with that. The teeth are often delayed in their eruption, and there's extensive tooth decay, and there's the La Chapelle specimen, 30 years old, roughly, and lost most of his cheek teeth. And they also had fragile bones. They had loads of fractures of their bones all over the place, and people thought they were related to maybe they did all that in big game hunting and stuff, but obviously to be scientific, they could have been related to rodeo riding. So one explanation of the origin of disappearance of Neanderthals is that normal humans went through some sort of ice age climate change, developed rickets, and when things improved more, the normal human features reappeared again. So Neanderthals' conclusion, they're fully human. So I'll speed up a bit now. So there we've got no fossils of chimpanzees and gorillas, basically. You've got Australopithecines, Homo habilis, and Homo erectus all living at the same time. The Neanderthals coming and going in a small window in history, apparently. So what about ancient human-like fossils? Well, there's some modern human-like skulls found from School 5 and Kafsi, they're caves in Israel, and they're dated up to 100,000 years ago. And nearby you've got Neanderthal specimens, which are 60,000 years old, apparently. So again, you've got Neanderthals living in this window with normal humans either side of that. There's a specimen called OH8, which is a partial left foot, dated 1.7 million years old. There it is with the rest of the bones filled in. You compare it to the Australopithecine foot. You can see the human foot on the left-hand side, the OH8 in the middle, Australopithecine on the right, and you can see it looks like a human-type foot. And if you look closely at the great toe metatarsal, that little facet that I mentioned earlier on, which is there, it shows you that that big toe was facing forwards and joined onto the index metatarsal, unlike the chimpanzee there and the 573 Australopithecine foot. So OH8 is unlike an Australopithecine foot. It's identical to a human foot as far as we can say, and so humans were alive 1.7 million years ago, apparently. There is some femurs, 1481, 1475, and there's a modern human femur next to it, and these femurs are supposed to be 1.9 million years old. They're perfectly human. There's these Laetoli footprints in northern Tanzania, supposed to be 3.5 million years old, and there's the footprints in the middle there, human-like footprints, and to the right-hand side obliquely are some animal footprints. If you have a close look at the footprint, there's the Australopithecine foot on the right-hand side again. You can see the heel and the instep features of the imprints are just human-like. You can see that the imprints made by the great toe and the rest of the toes, well, you can't, I can, human-like, and see if you can see the gap between the big toe and the index toe is just as you'd expect in a human foot. And also, interestingly, there's a second footprint inside the first print, and that's interesting because you don't really get many animal babies walking in the footsteps of their parents, but there's two individuals here, one with a smaller foot walking in the footprints of the bigger individual. So that may well be a child walking in the footprints of the parent. So The Laetoli footprints are entirely human-looking, and yet in the 8-man series, BBC series year 2000, they depicted Australopithecines making those footprints, and there you can see the footprint of some drawing of an Australopithecine with a big toe like a human, when they knew a number of years, 5 years beforehand, that they had big toes that stuck out like a thumb. So the Laetoli footprints are unique to the human form, and so humans were alive supposedly 3.5 million years ago. And there's a radius, which is the forearm bone next to the thumb. It's supposed to be 4 million years old. It looks exactly like a human. And if you look at the shape of the bones at the bottom end, that's the wrist. If you look at the bones at the bottom end, you'll find that people have said that humans have small depressions made by the lunate bone, which is one of the bones in the wrist, but in fact there's a variation that occurs. In the middle there's a human with a small depression, and then on the right-hand side there's a human bone with a large impression. So this radius, which is supposed to be 4 million years old, fits into the normal variation of living humans. And we'll just skip this one because that just covers the same material. So we can say that the radius is unlike any ape radius. It's identical to human radius. So humans were alive supposedly 4 million years ago. So in summary, from what we've seen, is that there's no real fossil evidence of chimpanzees and gorillas, which are supposed to be ancestral to the Australopithecines. Australopithecines, Homo habilis and Homo erectus fossils are all found contemporaneously. Neanderthals come and go. And the modern human-like fossils extend way back to 4 million years, living at the same time as the earliest Australopithecines. You remember the coelacanth principle says that all creatures could have lived contemporaneously in the past. That means that obviously chimpanzees were alive yesterday, although there's no fossil evidence of them living yesterday, and they could have been alive millions of years ago as well. And so with everything else, that all these characters, animals or humans, could have been alive at the same time. Remember we said there is good evidence that life has not been around for millions of years. So all those dates of million years are erroneous. And I just have to show you this. I found this on the plane flying over. It's from it's like a Time magazine, but a baby version of it in England called The Week. And it's 16th of October. And it says the Asian who fathered us all. And it's a study made by scientists at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, I think, based on human migration patterns, where they concluded that everybody on Earth is descended from a single man who lived 3,500 years ago, lived in Eastern Asia, 1415 BC. So the dates are a bit different from millions of years ago. But that's just, I haven't seen the original article, but that's just something from just 2 weeks ago, interestingly enough. And that's just in a secular news journal. Conclusion, Australopithecines and humans lived at the same time. No evidence for apes evolving into humans. Homo erectus and Neanderthals were fully human, and our great ancestors were never some human. Apes are not our distant cousins. Bananas are unrelated. And whether you look at, we talked about human and apes, but whether you look at any other creatures, there's no evidence for any other creature turning into a totally different creature. And of course, Genesis 1:26 says that God made all the animals according to their kinds, and that fits in with the evidence that we have. So we can conclude that anyone who has no doubt that chimpanzees are our distant cousins, or that fishes and worms share a common ancestry with humans, either has not studied the wealth of evidence to the contrary, or is living in a state of denial. Now, if humans have not evolved from apes, then we must have been created fully human in the beginning. Genesis 1:27 says that God created man in his own image. He created him male and female. Genesis 2:7 says that God breathed life into his nostrils. It didn't say he breathed life or breathed his image into a chimpanzee or an Australopithecine. And if you have problems with interpreting Genesis, Luke 24:27, when Jesus is walking along the Emmaus Road with his disciples, he's quoting from Moses and all the prophets. And, of course, the first book of Moses is Genesis. And so if you've got a problem with Genesis, you better talk to Jesus about that. Now, I said there's no evidence for any creature evolving into another completely different creature, and apes did not evolve into human beings. But the original title of this talk was going to be, Can Humans Evolve? And I thought that was a bit not quite right, but as the weeks went on as I prepared, actually it's quite a useful title. So can a man apes can't turn into humans, but can a man turn into a totally different creature? And surprisingly, the answer is, or not surprisingly, the answer is yes. A man can turn into a completely different creature. 2 Corinthians 5:17. If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away, and behold, the new has come. John 3:3, Jesus answered, truly I say, unless one is born anew, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Jesus actually said he's the way. No one comes to the Father except through him. John 14:6.
Small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Now that picture is the way, you won't know this, but in England when that event happened in 1969, that's the way the picture was televised in England. It's upside down. And it's clearly NASA had sent the Australian pictures to England. You can change it around. If you change it like that, one small step for man, you can change the orientation of it. But you can also change the wordage. So if you do a little alteration, you have one giant leap for mankind. You can't see that in red, but you can see it here. I've got that here. See, just there. All right. So if you say one giant leap for mankind, one small step for man, what does that mean? See, God himself took one giant leap for mankind, so that to be born again requires just one small step for man. So God became a man so the giant leap that God made was to become a man. And John 1:14 says the Word, that's Jesus, became flesh and dwelt amongst us. Jesus allowed himself to be crucified as a sacrifice for our sins. 1 Peter 2:24. He, that's Jesus, bore himself, our sins in his body on the tree, that we might die to sin and live in righteousness. And Jesus rose again from the dead and thereby defeated sin and death. Romans 8:2. For the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus set me free from the law of sin and death. So that leaves the small step for man. By repenting of sin and accepting Jesus the Messiah as Lord and Savior, a man can be born again, have his sins forgiven, and have eternal life. Now, when there's an empty tomb, when the women came to see the body of Jesus on the third day, they met an angel who stood there and said, "He is not here, he is risen." So you have an empty tomb. Jesus did not die and just got buried, and his bones are still there being recirculated into grass or something. He's alive. John 10:9 says, "I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved." So Jesus, because he's resurrected and is alive, he can still say that today. And that is the good news. So I'll leave you with the words of Genesis 1-4 by, I think it's Apollo 13 crew.
Let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light, and it was good.
Thank you.
This has been One Small Speck to Man, presented by Vij Sodera. To receive a free catalog of all of our Bible teaching books and tapes, information on upcoming Bible conferences in your area, or details of our missionary outreach, call 800-977-2177 24 hours a day, or on the web at compass.org.